Working the night shift at Walmart always had its odd moments, but nothing could have prepared me for the night the crazy man came in. It was around 1 a.m. The store was eerily quiet except for the occasional sound of boxes being moved. I was stocking shelves in the toy aisle, half lost in my thoughts, when I first noticed him. He was tall, disheveled, with wild hair and an intense look in his eyes that made my skin crawl. At first I thought he was just another sleep-deprived customer looking for something random. But as he wandered closer, I could feel his eyes burning into me. Ignoring him, I continued stacking the Lego sets, trying to shake off the unease creeping up my spine. "Hey," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that echoed in the empty aisle. I glanced up, forcing a polite smile. "Can I help you find something?" He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "You're beautiful," he finally said, his voice dripping with a strange, unsettling sincerity. "I'm in love with you." My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just another weird customer. Thanks," I muttered, taking a step back. "Can I help you with something?" He grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. "Yeah, you can come with me. I'm going to take you to my house. We'll be together forever." Panic surged through me. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't leave my shift." He moved closer, and I could smell the stale sweat and alcohol on him. "No, you don't understand. We belong together. I've seen it. You're the one." I took another step back, my mind racing. The night shift manager, Tom, was in the back office, but I didn't want to leave the aisle and risk this guy following me. "Let me get my manager," I said, trying to keep calm. "No." His voice was suddenly loud, echoing through the store. He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "You're coming with me, now!" I yanked my hand back, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Let go of me," I shouted, hoping someone, anyone, would hear me. He tightened his grip, pulling me towards him. I struggled, but his hold was ironclad. "Please," he whispered, almost pleadingly. "Don't make this difficult." Desperation gave me strength. I kicked out, hitting him in the shin. He howled in pain and loosened his grip just enough for me to break free. I ran down the aisle, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and rounded the corner, heading for the back office. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps heavy and erratic. "You can't run from me," he screamed. "We're meant to be together." I burst into the office, slamming the door behind me. Tom looked up, startled. "What the hell's going on?" "There's a guy out there," I panted. "He said he's in love with me and wants to take me to his house." Tom's eyes widened, and he immediately reached for the phone to call security. I could hear the man banging on the office door, shouting incoherently. "Stay here," Tom said, his voice calm but firm. He picked up a baseball bat he kept in the office for protection and stepped out. I locked the door behind him, my hands trembling. I could hear their voices through the door. Tom trying to reason with the man's responses growing more frantic and aggressive. Suddenly there was a loud crash, followed by a thud. Silence. My heart was in my throat. I listened intently, straining to hear anything. Then a knock on the door. "It's Tom," came the muffled voice. "Open up, it's safe now." I unlocked the door and peeked out. Tom stood there looking shaken but unhurt. The crazy man was lying on the floor, unconscious, a small pool of blood forming under his head. "Security's on their way," Tom said. "He won't be bothering you again." Relief washed over me, but the fear lingered. Even after the police arrived and took the man away, I couldn't shake the feeling of his grip on my wrist, his words echoing in my mind. We belong together. I finished my shift in a daze, every shadow and sound making me jump. When morning came, I walked to my car, exhausted but relieved it was over. But the memory of that night stayed with me, a haunting reminder of how quickly normal can turn to nightmare. It was just past midnight, and I found myself standing in the fluorescent-lit aisles of a nearly deserted Walmart. The store was quiet, save for the occasional clinking of stock shelves and the low hum of the air conditioning. I had decided to do some late-night shopping, hoping to avoid the daytime crowds. My cart was half full with essentials milk, bread, a few frozen meals. The stillness of the store was oddly calming, a stark contrast to the bustling chaos I usually encountered. As I turned into the electronics section, I noticed a group of people entering the store. They looked rough, disheveled clothes, wild eyes, and an unsettling energy about them. There were 4 of them, all men, and they moved with a predatory grace. My heart began to race, a creeping sense of dread clawing at the edges of my mind. At first, I tried to ignore them, focusing on the items I needed. but it quickly became apparent that their intentions were far from innocent. They started grabbing items off the shelves, stuffing them into bags they had brought with them. The few employees on duty seemed to hesitate, unsure whether to confront them or call for help. One of the men, tall and gaunt with a menacing glare, noticed me watching and smirked. "See something you like?" he called out, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I quickly looked away, hoping not to provoke them further. I pushed my cart towards the back of the store, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. I needed to find a safe place to hide until this was over. But as I neared the pharmacy section, I heard a commotion. The group had moved there, and their behavior had escalated. They were shouting, knocking over displays, and one of them had grabbed a young woman by the arm, pulling her towards the checkout area. "Everyone get on the ground!" one of them yelled, brandishing a knife. "Empty your pockets and hand over your phones." Panic set in. My body felt like it was made of lead, each step towards the exit a Herculean effort. I ducked behind a shelf, trying to make myself as small as possible. From my hiding spot, I could see the terrified faces of other customers and employees, all complying with the demands of the intruders. The young woman was crying, her sobs echoing through the store. Suddenly, a loud crash came from the front of the store. One of the drug users had thrown a cash register to the floor, its contents spilling out in a cascade of coins and bills. The sight seemed to send them into a frenzy. They began tearing apart the store with renewed vigor, their aggression ramping up as they encountered no resistance. I knew I had to get out. I inched my way along the shelves, careful to stay out of sight. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a deafening thud in my ears. I finally reached the emergency exit at the back of the store, praying it wasn't alarmed. I pushed on the door, and to my immense relief, it swung open silently. The cool night air hit me like a splash of water, jolting me into action. I ran to my car, parked far from the entrance. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my keys, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see one of the men following me. The parking lot was eerily empty, the only sounds the distant hum of the freeway and the chirping of crickets. Once inside my car, I locked the doors and dialed 911. My voice shook as I explained the situation to the dispatcher. They assured me that police were on their way and advised me to stay in my car. I could see the entrance to the Walmart from where I was parked, and I watched in tense anticipation. Minutes felt like hours, but eventually, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the parking lot. Several police cars pulled up, officers spilling out and rushing into the store. I saw them enter with weapons drawn, their expressions grim and focused. I held my breath, waiting for any sign that the nightmare was over. It wasn't long before the officers emerged, leading the drug users in handcuffs. The men were still shouting obscenities, their eyes wild and unfocused. Paramedics arrived soon after, attending to the injured and traumatized customers. I stayed in my car, numb with shock, watching the scene unfold. When it was finally over, an officer approached my vehicle. He took my statement, his face a mask of concern and professionalism. I told him everything I had seen, every terrifying detail etched into my memory. He thanked me for my cooperation and assured me that the perpetrators would be brought to justice. As I drove home, the events of the night replayed in my mind. The Walmart, usually a mundane part of my routine, had become a place of horror. The image of the young woman being dragged across the store haunted me, and I knew it would for a long time. I felt a deep sense of gratitude for my safety, but also a lingering fear that such violence could erupt without warning. That night changed me. A stark reminder that danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. It was an ordinary evening at Walmart, the kind that blends into the monotony of everyday life. I was there to pick up a few groceries, a task so mundane it barely registered in my mind. The store was busy, filled with the usual mix of families, elderly couples, and lone shoppers like me, all moving about with their carts, engrossed in their own worlds. I was in the cereal aisle, debating between two brands, when the first scream pierced the air. It was a woman's scream, high-pitched and filled with a terror that sent a chill down my spine. I froze, the box of cereal slipping from my hand and tumbling to the floor. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear what was happening. "Everybody down! Get down on the floor now!" The voice was male, loud and commanding. It reverberated through the store, cutting through the background hum of chatter and the occasional beep of the cash registers. Panic surged through me as I realized what was happening. An armed person had entered the store. I dropped to the floor, my body trembling with fear. I peered through the gaps in the shelves, trying to catch a glimpse of the gunman. He was in the front of the store, near the entrance, waving a handgun wildly. He was shouting, but his words were lost in the chaos. People were screaming, running, and diving for cover. The air was thick with panic and the acrid scent of fear. I crawled on my hands and knees, trying to make my way to the end of the aisle. My heart was racing, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I needed to find a place to hide, somewhere safe. But where? The shelves offered little protection, and the open aisles felt like death traps. I made it to the end of the aisle and peered around the corner. The gunman was pacing back and forth, his eyes wild and his face contorted with rage. He fired a shot into the ceiling, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Shards of plaster rained down and the screams intensified. "Everyone stay down!" he shouted. "No one move or I'll start shooting." I ducked back into the aisle, my mind racing. What should I do? My phone was in my pocket, but I was too afraid to reach for it. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I glanced around, looking for anything I could use as a weapon, but the shelves were stocked with nothing but groceries. The minutes stretched into an eternity. I could hear the gunman shouting, making demands that were incoherent over the din. Occasionally, there was the sound of another gunshot, followed by more screams. I felt helpless, trapped in a nightmare with no way out. Then, suddenly, there was a commotion near the entrance. I risked a glance and saw a group of police officers storming in, their guns drawn. They moved with a precision and confidence that was both reassuring and terrifying. The gunman turned to face them, his expression one of shock and defiance. "Drop the weapon," one of the officers shouted. "Put it down now." For a moment, it seemed like the gunman would comply. He hesitated, lowering his arm slightly. But then, with a crazed look in his eyes, he raised the gun again. The officers fired, the sound of their shots blending into one deafening roar. The gunman fell to the ground, his body twitching before going still. Silence fell over the store, broken only by the sobs and whimpers of the terrified shoppers. I stayed on the floor, too afraid to move, until I felt a hand on my shoulder. I looked up to see a police officer, his face kind but stern. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now." I nodded, my body trembling with relief and shock. I slowly got to my feet, my legs unsteady beneath me. The store was a mess, with overturned carts and spilled groceries everywhere. People were emerging from their hiding places, their faces pale and drawn. As I made my way to the exit, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me. The ordinary evening at Walmart had turned into a nightmare, one that I would never forget. The reality of how fragile our lives are, how quickly everything can change, settled over me like a dark cloud. And as I stepped out into the night, the flashing lights of the police cars illuminating the scene, I knew that I would never feel truly safe again. I never liked shopping at Walmart, especially during the day. The bustling crowds, the endless lines, and the cacophony of sounds made it unbearable. So I adopted a habit of shopping in the early hours of the morning, around 2 a.m., when the store was practically empty. It was my way of escaping the chaos, finding solace in the stillness of the night. But that night, the tranquility I sought turned into a nightmare I would never forget. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss as I stepped into the dimly lit store. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, casting eerie shadows across the aisles. I grabbed a cart, its wheels squeaking in protest, and began my usual routine. The store was eerily quiet, with only the faint hum of the air conditioning breaking the silence. It was the perfect time to shop, or so I thought. As I made my way through the produce section, I noticed a figure out of the corner of my eye. A man, standing still, staring intently at the rows of apples. He was tall, with a gaunt frame and disheveled hair that hung over his face. His clothes were dirty and torn, and he had an unsettling presence about him. I shrugged it off, assuming he was just another insomniac like myself, and continued my shopping. I turned into the cereal aisle, grabbing a box of my favorite brand, when I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the man again, standing at the end of the aisle, staring directly at me. My heart skipped a beat, and I quickly looked away, trying to shake off the unease that was creeping over me. As I moved from aisle to aisle, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I turned around, the man was there, always keeping his distance but never taking his eyes off me. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he following me? Was it just a coincidence? I tried to rationalize the situation, telling myself that I was overreacting. I reached the frozen food section, my cart now half full, and opened one of the freezer doors to grab a pack of frozen vegetables. The cold air rushed out, making me shiver. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around, and there he was, standing just a few feet away, his eyes boring into mine. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes widening with an unsettling intensity. Panic surged through me, and I instinctively backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. Without thinking, I abandoned my cart and hurried down the aisle, glancing back to see if he was following me. He was. His footsteps echoed in the empty store, growing louder with each passing second. I needed to find help, someone, anyone. But the store seemed deserted. I turned a corner, hoping to lose him in the labyrinth of aisles, but he was relentless. I could hear his heavy breathing, feel his presence getting closer. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. I spotted a door marked "Employees Only" and made a beeline for it, praying it wasn't locked. I burst through the door, finding myself in a narrow corridor lined with boxes and cleaning supplies. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. I darted down the corridor, my heart pounding in my ears. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps quickening. Desperation set in as I reached the end of the corridor, faced with two options: a stairwell leading to the upper level, or a door marked "Exit." I chose the exit, hoping to find safety outside the store. I pushed the door open and stumbled into the parking lot, the cool night air hitting my face. But the nightmare was far from over. The parking lot was empty, save for a few scattered cars. The man emerged from the store, his eyes locked onto me. I ran, my legs burning with effort, my breath coming in ragged gasps. He chased me relentlessly, his footsteps growing louder, closer. I spotted my car at the far end of the lot and sprinted towards it, my keys clutched tightly in my hand. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking as I glanced over my shoulder. He was almost upon me, his face twisted in a sinister grin. I finally managed to unlock the door and threw myself inside, slamming it shut just as he reached the car. He pounded on the window, his eyes wild with rage. I started the engine, my hands trembling, and floored the accelerator, leaving him standing in the parking lot, his figure growing smaller in the rearview mirror. I didn't stop driving until I was miles away, my heart still racing, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. I never went back to that Walmart again, and to this day, the memory of that night haunts me. The man who chased me, the terror I felt, it's something I'll never forget. Shopping in the early hours of the morning had seemed like a good idea, a way to escape the chaos, but it turned into a nightmare that would forever linger in the shadows of my mind.